Thanks.
There we go.
Okay. Good evening. I'd like to call the special meeting of the Budget and Finance Commission to order. Doug, if we could start with a roll call.
Commissioner Allen is absent. Commissioner Jesty?
Here.
Commissioner Marin?
Here.
Chair Castle?
Here.
Commissioner Woodham?
Here.
Commissioner Samples is absent, and Commissioner Sherbin.
Here.
Okay, thank you. If you would please stand and while we say our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next, we would like to approve the order of agenda for tonight.
So move.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next on the agenda are the blue folder items. Do we have any blue folder items? We have the approved
No.
budgets.
Yeah, there's no blue folders tonight.
Okay. Next on the agenda is the consent calendar. We have approval of the affidavit of posting for the special budget and finance commission meeting scheduled for tonight, May 30th. Do I have a motion to approve?
So move.
A second?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
There are no excluded consent calendar items or items continued from previous agendas, which brings us down to item I, which is the discussion and possible action regarding the fiscal year 24-25 city manager's proposed budget and the fiscal year 25 through 29 city manager's proposed 5-year capital improvement program. Tonight we'll have that presented by our finance director, Wendy Colazo.
Good evening, Wendy Colazo, Finance Director. Thanks so much to the commission again, and it's great to be able to present to you the city manager's proposed fiscal year 24-25 budget, as well as the 5-year CIP. He is making his way down as we speak. Today's overview, he'll be walking over every bit of the budget through revenues and appropriations, and as he's coming along right here on cue.
Perfect entrance.
And I will give it to him so I can, he can take it away.
Good evening, Commissioners. How are you tonight? It's a pleasure again to be in front of you. So a little different than the first discussion we have, no longer in the input phase, ready now for your more official review of the proposed budget. As Wendy mentioned, we delivered the budget to the City Council on time on May 16th. This year is a little different than what we've done in the past. We do have published versions of the document in a more traditional format, but we are relying now more heavily on online software, a publishing software, ClearGov, to help format and distribute the budget more widely and more immediately to the community. So it's a fancy tool. It's helpful in many respects internally. We've had some like we do with any new software, some call it growing pains to, and some auto-populating that occurs with the templates and the formatting, and the tables look a little bit different than sometimes they do when you do them manually and you print the document. So we've gone through that exercise. It's an evolving process for us. So there are a few things that initially hit the print on the 16th that we've since identified from typographical errors and some fund balance pulling that we've corrected. But we are pleased with ClearGov. We think it will be helpful longer term and should make things more efficient for us going forward. Now, on the recipient side of the equation, it'll look a little differently to all of you than prior documents have. The city manager's message is in a tab called transmittal letter, which is a fairly common term of art. There's new sections that occur. There's new graphs and tables that are automatically created that we haven't used in the past. Arguably, some of them are a little bit superfluous. We may want to refine that as we go forward to identify what's helpful to the public and what isn't. So we're open to feedback, constructive criticism. If you see anything in there that you think is is kind of nifty and you'd like to see continue, let us know if you see anything in there that, you're like, I couldn't really follow that. It sort of confused the issue. Also let us know, because there have been a few things that we flagged that, have forced us to have to reconcile in odd ways and the like. So
This is a great first step, though. We killed a lot of trees with printing this.
We did.
But this is a really neat document. I picked it up 3 or 4 days ago and have spent some time going over. Have some of the obvious questions that we'll get into during your presentation, but A+ for the document and where you stand
Well,
on it now.
it's good to hear that. Sometimes we're a little more critical on ourselves than maybe we should be, but ultimately the audience isn't us. It's really all of you and the members of the community. So if you're finding it helpful on first blush, we'll take that as a compliment. That's pretty cool. So with that, maybe next slide, Wendy. So as I mentioned, ClearGov, new formatting, we're kind of working through it. And again, if you see anything in there that looks inconsistent or inaccurate, let us know. As we always do with each budget, we have our first budget response report that is effectively, for lack of a better word, corrections and retractions, right? There's always some level of typographical error or inconsistency in the budget when it's published each year. When you have something with this many documents and tables in it, you're bound to have something that's a little bit off. We strive for perfection, but that's a high bar. So if you see something, let us know. We correct it through BRR number 1 every year. We identify that change and make sure that it's noted in final adoption, so the adopted version of the document is clear and concise. The transmittal letter, as you see in there, lays out a variety of things, kind of tells a little bit of the story. This budget is a little bit different than the last couple we've had. I'll get into the thematic elements of it here in a little bit. The document always includes our core budget. This commission's very attuned to this. This is really our obligatory expenditures each and every year going forward. Personnel costs, core ongoing maintenance and operations expenditures, our internal service fund allocations that are updated at mid-year every year and then reflected in the subsequent budget, our capital outlay that's committed previously, anything we really have no choice but to do. That's our starting point with the budget. That's where we set our initial expenditure total. And then from there, we look at what needs to change and those are reflected in our decision packages. This year we have 63 decision packages, still a pretty good size number, but I think if you've gone through it, you'll recognize that for the most part, they're somewhat continuations of the programs that we've trialed and piloted in years past that we think are successful and should be maintained. And then in other instances, they are reflective of core and really unavoidable costs associated with utility increases, contractual services that have grown year over year, things like tree trimming or the price of gas or electricity, water, things we just have no choice but to absorb into the budget going forward to keep up with contemporary inflation. And lastly, as I mentioned, we have our budget response reports, which really provide supplemental information for you, for the council. It's an opportunity for the council to ask kind of the what if questions. If we were to fund this, what would that require? Hey, I'd like to see improvements at the intersection of 182nd Street and Englewood Avenue. What would that cost? What would that look like? So it's an opportunity for the council, and it's a really, I think it's a great exercise. It allows us to kind of delve into some creative ideas. We don't always fund what's in the budget response report. Sometimes it's just informational and council gets that information. They go, okay, yeah, that's a lot more money than I thought it would be, or yeah, that's kind of infeasible. So we don't incorporate it in the final budget, but it's there to provide kind of a Q&A opportunity for the public. So what are the themes? As I mentioned, and I've talked to you all about this, and I said this at our meeting a couple weeks back, the focus this year was to absorb some of those new employee compensation and benefit costs that we knew were coming. We had new agreed upon MOUs with most of our labor groups that resulted in increased personnel expenses and in some case insurance, supplemental coverages, et cetera. Those were known costs. We needed to absorb those. We knew we had upcoming mandatory M&O expenses, as I just mentioned, utility costs, the like, inflationary pressures on a macro level are affecting our local budget, and we needed to make sure we had funding to cover that. We wanted to continue those pilot programs, particularly in police and fire, that were successful. A great example of that is the additional crossing guard locations that we're providing now for school safety. We used to only fund 12 locations in the city. We're up to 27 now on a pilot basis. The funding that's proposed in the decision package gets us to about 22 or 24, doesn't retain all 27 locations, but does kind of doubles our efforts in that regard. And then, of course, incorporating technology costs. In many instances, we are using and relying on technology more and more to deliver core service. We have to go away from funding those on a one-time basis to really recognizing, hey, we're not going backwards. Things like body cameras, things like our drone program, they've really become part of our core competency. We need them to be effective in the delivery there. So we've got to build those into the structural budget. And then lastly, we've been sequestering money very strategically to cover fairly significant increased claims costs that were coming this fiscal year, insurance premium costs that have grown because that market, as you all know, has inflated significantly. And as this body is well aware, our upcoming CalPERS liability payment, which is the first time that we've had that in a couple of years. What you'll see in the proposed budget is the recommendation that we pay what is roughly a $3.2 million UAL this year. That's important because that's significantly more than what is required by PERS. They give us an opportunity to kind of ramp up that payment program and start at a much lower level of roughly $1.8 million. But what we opted as staff to recommend to the council is that we don't create a negative amortization schedule for us. We pay full principal and interest for the discounted rate, and we're proposing the 3.2 million now, and we're going to work that into the structural budget so we know we can sustain that over time. So we didn't want to go backwards. We don't necessarily want to pay the whole thing down, right? We don't want to give more money to PERS than we really have to, but at the same time, we didn't want to create a negative amortization scenario where our UAL was going to grow year over year because we weren't covering full principal and interest. So the proposal.
We'll come back to that later in your presentation, right?
Yeah, we will. It's part of the core budget. We can talk more about that if you'd like. But anyway, we absorbed those pretty significant expenditures in this program, and we felt good about that. And we set what we called future carryover assignment money or future assignment money aside and have been watching that for a while to determine how much of that we could sequester for these uses. And thankfully, we were able to sequester most of that funding for those purposes and avoid this year. One of the things we're really pleased with the proposed budget did not require utilization of our CalPERS reserve fund, which has roughly $8 million in it, nor did it, and God forbid, ever require any use of our economic contingency reserve, which has a little under $9 million in it. So we left our reserves untouched, and we were able to balance the budget in a positive way without those two pots of money. So you start with about $4.2 million in beginning fund balance. That's predominantly from the money that we had sequestered in that future assignment category at mid-year and last year's year end. We have pretty strong revenues at roughly $16 million coming into the year. We talked a little bit about those projections. I think we have a slide on some of the more, this is high level. We've got a slide on taxation and the like, so we can go into that more detail. Core expenditures at a little under $114 million. As I mentioned, we have flexibility in the payment we make here, but we're proposing the full principal and interest payment of roughly $3.2 million on the UAL basis. Our proposed decision packages, and this was very strategic, the ongoing proposed expenditures actually, are generally fairly balanced to ongoing expenses. So revenues and expenses on an ongoing basis are structurally balanced there. So we feel pretty good about that. And then we've got roughly $3.2 million of one-time decision packages, which again are a bit of that continuation of some of those pilot programs that aren't necessarily fundamental to the city's services that we deliver, but are important and things that we think are council initiatives that they'd like to see continue in the community. Ultimately, the council will have that flexibility as they go through their deliberations next month. And then we aren't recommending this year any additional money to the CIP. As this body knows, we're trying to work through our backlog of projects rather than grow it. So we're being judicious there. And really what that leaves is about $83,000 for the city council to play with. Unlike last year where we had about 1.8 million of residual fund balance, we're tighter this year. If the council wants to make adjustments to the budgets, our recommendation to them is going to be pull from other decision packages that are proposed if you want to fund initiatives that haven't been contemplated in the document. Next slide, please. Again, this won't be a surprise to you all. You're more in touch with these projections than most. Property tax continues to be strong for us. Sales and use tax generally flat. UUT generally flat. I thought we had updated that slide, Wendy. The property transfer tax and property tax in lieu should be adjusted there. I think this might be an older version. But the 2.3 million that you see in the property tax in lieu and the property transfer tax at 8.9 are juxtaposed there. Those should be flopped, but both of them are flat. And then the transient occupancy tax at 8.2 million is a bit of a bright spot. We're projecting about half of what we would normally receive from the Marine Avenue Hotel site coming online next year. So we're increasing our TOT by 1.5 million going forward. So that figure is, like I said, still got some incremental upside for us in the following fiscal year, assuming that property continues to perform at current rate. So that overall, about a 3.4% increase in our major general fund tax revenue categories, giving us an additional $2.6 million in operating ongoing revenue. Next slide.
Mike, is that based on economic projections?
Yeah, very specific projections. Each category has a specific formula that we use or consultants. So property tax is supported by regular data checkpoints with our consultant HDL, who you've probably heard from here before. We're in regular touch with her on forecasting, and we look at actuals, we look at forecasts, we look at macro issues, and candidly, this is a very conservative projection. We try to be conservative in these growths. That number could easily be proposed at 4 to 4.5%. We're tempering that. We'd like to make sure we hit the mark there, rather have excess funding at the end of the year than underperform. Sales tax, also a separate group in HDL that monitors that. We work with them on a quarterly basis. We meet very regularly. We constantly receive updated forecasting projections based on what they're experiencing in the market. UUT, we have an outside consultant that helps us there. We're being very conservative with that figure. Transient occupancy tax, we really just look at our performance and then what we know to be coming in the future. In this case, all growth is projected as part of the Marine Avenue Hotel property situation. We left the rest of it as we projected based on mid-year actuals. So again, I think a fairly conservative number there. And the balance of it, as you can see, is fairly flat. So there's good backup here. We don't do this alone. It's not just, the team and I, going, hey, what do we think? We're fairly thoughtful about this and we get help. So,
Thank you.
next slide, please, Wendy. Okay, personnel figure here. Again, that's core. You can expect that. That's reflective of changes in MOUs, scheduled salary increases, benefit costs, et cetera. We've tightened our forecasting on the personnel side. We've had some cushion in that budget line item in past years. We've refined that based on current agreements. So we've got growth there. M&O is down largely because of one-time initiatives that were funded last year that are coming out of core and then are in general, a lot of what you're seeing coming out of there is put back in the proposed decision package. It's just, we weren't proposing those as structural changes. So you got kind of debits and credits between core and the DPs. Internal service funds were adjusted at mid-year. There's no real modification to that now. Capital outlays, different year over year. We had set money aside on a one-time basis. It's changed. We have some new transfers in and transfers out that are occurring as part of that schedule now too, the way we're categorizing our debt. And that's in part why you see these changes. Other uses is another example of that. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, we've got that UAL payment that's new to the budget this year that we didn't have last year at $3.2 million.
Are these personnel costs just all lumped together or they're divided into each department?
Yeah, so this is the aggregate, general fund, citywide, all departments flowing into that total. Enterprise funds that are not general fund funded are separate from this number and are in different categories.
What are the administrative costs as a percentage of total revenue?
Not very high, to be honest. But on the ISF side, it depends on how you classify it. If you're talking just sort of administrative, like city manager or HR, that's one category. Our internal service fund side allocates everything from building maintenance to information and technology costs to their pro rata share of payroll obligations in the finance department. So your ISF captures all of those internal service support costs. So, it's not the traditional overhead. Overhead's usually admin and decision-making. We're well under 10% in that category. But if you factor in building maintenance and everything else, you're at that bigger number at 28 million. All at or below what I would call best management practice in the industry. So there you got the total at $117 million, tracking very well with core revenues in that general sense. Next slide, please. Capital budget summary, we don't have to spend a ton of time on this, but we're recommending an additional $17.3 million for appropriation beyond our carryover assignments this year. We've got a total of 125 projects in the CIP. 13 previously approved projects are receiving supplemental appropriation, and there are 13 new projects to the budget. But you'll recall we were at 126 CIPs last year. We're actually one less than that this year. So this was us trying to, let's not grow the list. Let's try to keep it flat. Let's work through the backlog, make sure we've got funding set aside to cover complete cost of construction as opposed to kind of getting a bunch of pots out there that we can't necessarily accomplish.
You said 17.3 million of new appropriations.
Of new appropriations beyond carryover. So we've already got $65.4 million of recommended carryover assignment, and we've got another 17.3 million in new. So when you aggregate those two collectively, you're at the roughly $83 million total CIP.
But I thought you showed us a slide a moment ago which said zero allocation to CIP.
Well, that's zero allocation from the general fund in the proposed budget to support capital outlay, to support the CIP. So this is money that is coming from different sources.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. And then to put it in some perspective, to help people understand, and we've talked about this, what we can reasonably accomplish in a single fiscal year. 23-24, as I've mentioned to you in the past, was probably our single most productive capital project year on record. We spent a little over $21 million. We completed 25 projects, and we designed another 20 or so. That's max capacity for us. We can't do much more than that given current staffing levels. So that's, when you look at it and you say, okay, you got a 5-year CIP of a little over $80 million, you're spending about $21 million a year, you're doing okay. You're trending at an appropriate level. So I try to think about those two together.
Last year when we were talking about the capital CIP, one of the factors being tossed around was the extremely high inflation we had over the prior 12 to 24 months. Inflation now is compared to 2 years ago, is up by some, 14%, somewhere in that range. Are we seeing that same sort of increase across the board in what we're buying and putting into capital improvement projects?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would argue that over the prior 2 years, if you look at the first 18 months of the last 2 years, we saw a higher rate of inflation in the construction industry than I think the macro economy did, particularly for our projects, because building in the public right of way, right? Typically transportation related projects. That's where most of our expenditure goes. A lot of demand out there for that. You've got Metro building a bunch of things. You've got Caltrans building a bunch of things. We had a big backlog throughout the state of massive transportation related efforts. The demand on those contractors is all over the place. So we were competing not just with macro inflation, but we were competing with other public agencies who were flush with capital funds and trying to execute projects. So we saw an additional spike, I feel like, in the municipal construction sector beyond traditional inflationary numbers. That's come down a little bit. The market slowed a little bit there. We're now starting to see again budgeted estimates for construction cost estimates come in during bidding at that estimated level as opposed to being 5, 6, 8% higher than projected. So we're leveling off a touch. I think the broader municipal construction market's slowing down a smidge. But we are, I would say the biggest headwind we face now in the municipal construction area is the availability of equipment. Things like traffic signal poles, electrical cabinets, circuit breakers, these things take an exorbitant amount of time to procure. We are literally ordering traffic signal poles in some instances 18 months before they arrive on project site. So, and we do things creatively now. We'll procure them before we even award the contract. We'll order them and get them in the pipeline so we have at least some reason to believe they'll get here before the close of the construction cycle. Torrance Boulevard, a great example of that. It's difficult to get the signal equipment. I'm not quite sure what that pressure point is in the supply chain, but it's there. Vehicles is another example of that. We've got vehicles that we were scheduled to order in the 22-23 fiscal year, still not here yet. We've had purchase orders canceled by vendors. We can't, sorry, city, we can't deliver. We ordered 5 police patrol sedans in 2022. They came at us the next year and said, none of those are available. You got to order the 2023 model. We upped the purchase order. Then they come at us just recently. We can only get you one of the 5. Now you got to order the 2025 model. And it's constant. It's crazy making. So I'd say now our issue is like that. It's that availability of material supplies and equipment that's really a struggle for us in executing projects. And any delay hurts us because that inflationary pressure continues. You bid year over year, that number is going to go up. It just is. So I'd say it's leveling off, but it's still a struggle.
Can we, for these previously approved projects, can we get some details on when the project was initiated, how much we have already spent, what the latest forecast is?
Yeah, if you go through the CIP document, I don't know if you've printed this or looked at this, this is the proposed 5-year capital program. Each project will give you a bit of a history as to what it includes. It's not always detailed as to what work has been accomplished, but it describes what it is, original appropriation and sort of what's been carried over. If there's an interest in that retrospectively, we certainly could have the Public Works team come here and present to you more globally on those efforts.
We just need to see the numbers because some of these projects, they start out small and then they
grow.
Budget just keeps growing and we have no idea how much we have spent, how much more we need to spend. We don't want to see another high-speed rail project in the city.
Well, sometimes what happens is it'll start in the budget as a pre-design effort, right? Conceptual design effort. Hey, we need $50,000 to go out, bring somebody on to kind of conceptualize a project for us. And then it's, hey, we like that project. Let's go out and let's put money aside to develop formal plans and specifications and get us through an entitlement phase. Well, that $50,000 now all of a sudden becomes $2 million because we got to hire a high-end consultant and engineering firm to assist us in that. And then, hey, we've got revised estimates. We need $9 million to build it. We got to go out there and get the $9 million. So you might see a single project line item that starts really small and goes through all of those phases of development from pre-design all the way to execution. And you'll see tranches of funding grow throughout the 5-year plan consistent with those changes in schedule. So sometimes
sort of a spreadsheet, I think will the numbers, we don't want all the fine details.
Yeah. And I think one thing you might want to check out is we now have online an external facing customer portal where you can go over a map of the city and you can click on projects by location and it'll give you a little more detail and history. So that's something that's worth exploring at some point too. Yeah, but it's, good questions and we're always looking to manage as efficiently as we can. We use a lot more on-call consultants now. Instead of going out and hiring an individual to help us for a specific project, we hire groups of individuals, an inventory of consultants on a not-to-exceed basis that they're not guaranteed any work, but we can tap them at pre-negotiated rates to do that work as soon as we need it, as opposed to have to go back out to RFP and spend all that time in procurement. So that's helping us with the delivery of projects.
Okay.
Next slide, please, Wendy. So here's the calendar. This is a little dated now, but we started with the first introduction of the budget at City Council at the May 21st council meeting. Planning Commission looked at the general plan conformity at their meeting here last week. Public Works met last night to look at the budget, provided their input. You all tonight, obviously, the council will have their first hearing on it on June 4th. Harbor Commission will take their look at it on the 10th. The council will meet again on June 11th. That will be a CIP-focused hearing, and then if all goes well, the council will have their final hearing on June 18th and adopt the budget. Next slide. Yeah, so tonight's really just receive and file the budget presentation. Obviously, item B doesn't pertain to you. That's the city council's presentation as they give us direction on budget response reports. To put a little bit of a fine point on that, we have 51 budget response reports that we're preparing this year thus far. Could always get a few more requests in the next hearing or two. And again, that's the supplemental information that helps fill in the blanks on questions that are out there. But that's it in a nutshell. Happy to answer any questions you have, go through the decision packages if you're curious, and provide perspective, whatever you'd like.
One question to start out with, Mike. In this book, there are two places where the budget, total income and total expenses are shown, and they don't match up, but maybe they're not supposed to, but I don't understand it.
Yeah.
On page 7 and 8, it shows, for instance, total income, total revenue, 116.5. And back on page 67, which should be seems to be a summary of the general fund, it shows 113.2. So is there some reason why? Should I not expect those to be the same? Is that a different?
Let me take a quick peek here. Which summary page are we on there?
Comparing page 7 to page 67.
67.
There is a reason, if I may answer, City Manager.
Yeah.
The reason you see the difference and it will not balance is because there's a budgetary tool called transfers in, transfers out, and that is extracted from your page 67, so it will not net out zero.
Okay.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Okay, well, knowing that it shouldn't balance takes my question away, because I thought it shouldn't, so, okay.
Sorry, apologies. On the accounting side, we have other transactions that we have to do, and in order to get some budgetary items, we use those tools, but they're not accounted for as real appropriations or revenue, so
Yeah,
that causes the discrepancy.
What we try to do in the city manager's message, more so than really everywhere else, is synthesize it in more lay terms, more useful terms. The fund summaries that will trickle through the document tend to be more in an accounting format, that's being pulled and drawn directly from Munis, our financial system. What we try to do in the CM message is give you information that's a little more constructive, a little easier to track, a little easier to follow, and hopefully reconcile as you think about decisions.
You use the term in here, that the budget is structurally balanced. What do you mean by structurally balanced?
When I think of structural balance, I think about core ongoing revenues versus ongoing expenditures. What keeps me up at night is if we are using one-time sources of funding to balance and pay for expenses that I can reasonably expect to be reoccurring. What I will say is I'm pleasantly surprised in looking at the figures this year and the natural revenue growth along with some of the proposed revenue increases in the DPs. Generally pleased to report that our ongoing proposed revenues and ongoing proposed expenditures are very closely aligned. They're not perfectly balanced. They're, call it $100,000, $200,000 in spread. And depending on how much we want to commit to on future unfunded liability payments, you could argue that could tilt the number a little bit. We opted for a bigger number this year. If we see sustained revenue growth over the next few years, we'll be able to continue that bigger number. If we don't, we might have to toggle back a little bit. Of course, maybe we'll get an assist from PERS. Maybe they'll overperform. That number can come down a touch. So that number is a bit of a moving target. So I can't tell you unequivocally that, forecasted structural revenues in 2 years from now are unequivocally going to be higher than forecasted structural expenditures. But I can say with at least less worry and concern that we're closer there than I had feared we would be when we started the fiscal year this year and we got our supplemental UAL payment.
Let's talk about the 3.2 million of UAL. That, we've talked about that in the last couple of meetings. That is what CalPERS would say now is, their calculation is 2 years, using 2-year-old data.
Correct.
But as of the 2 years ago, that's what they would say is our UAL.
Yeah, what they're saying is the numbers, their allocation or request for that payment's a little bit newer than 2 years old, but it's based on the 22-23 fiscal year close.
And so the way we got up to 220 million or so that we refinanced was that same calculation year after year, adding to it and being added to. That was a cumulative total of that same calculation.
So if you rewind before we did the refinance, what we had, we were paying out of pocket on a UAL basis roughly $13 to $15 million a year on that payment schedule. And if you looked at what our 2022 year amortization schedule was, the real point in time value of that was roughly $220 million. So we financed, wrote that check, got ourselves to zero. Because of their lag, and we talked a little bit about this, that 220 was a little bit less than what we ultimately ended up needing to fully cover that cost based on their underperformance their significant, substantial underperformance in 22-23. But that was not, of course, known to us when we wrote that check because we wrote it early in that fiscal year. In hindsight, right, PERS would have probably said, okay, we're going to hold back another whatever based on that forecast. They just don't have enough real-time data to do that for us. So the lag then, fast forward a couple years, we get the UAL based on the 22-23 actuals. We were, just for a little bit, we were super funded. We had given them more money than we needed, and then we dipped, as you know, so.
But this payment of 3.2 essentially means that we have, through the latest as of the latest calculation, we're at zero UAL 2 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we were at zero, and then in 22-23.
So whatever's happened in the last 2 years changes that. But as far as their calculation is concerned, the most up-to-date calculation CalPERS has, when we pay this 3.2 million, we're even.
Well, what happened in that 2 year period is because of their performance, their UAL, the total UAL we owe jumped for all groups, miscellaneous and safety, jumped to like 60 million. So we have an outstanding, by their forecast, an outstanding currently unfunded accrued liability on paper of, call it $60 million, amortized over the next 20 years gets us to the $3.2 million UAL payment on an annual basis. If 23-24 or
so this 3.2 is our payment.
It's our annual payment. Yeah, it's our payment on that. So what we're doing is we're paying principal and interest against that new overall aggregate UAL of 60 million. And that's not exactly the number. It's 67 or whatever it is. I don't know exactly what it is. But yeah, it's a principal and interest payment against that total amount. Yeah. So we got more to pay, unless
The market does
a real
great.
bang up year and that 67 drops to 33 or something.
Yeah. We've had those years in the past where we're substantially above their
projection.
actuarial assumption, and if that happens, then we can eat into that. Because we had a couple of bad years at the tail end of what we were financing, which hadn't been included in the calculation yet.
Weren't available to us at the time, just given the way they do their cash flow.
We're still saving the four or five million a year compared to what we would have been paying.
Probably even more. We estimated 100 million in savings over the 20 years. That number's probably grown because if we had the 220 million of UAL on the books when they had that negative year, that would have compounded that figure for us. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't have had 67 additional, we'd have 90 additional or whatever it might be. So it's probably saved us even more than we originally forecast. Now it's painful because they're the gatekeeper what the forecast is and what we owe. But yeah, it probably even did better than we forecasted as a result. So, but yeah, this is a big number to absorb, but it's the number. It's not us saying, okay, well, we're going to tease it out. We're going to go to 1.5 this year and then 2 next year. And then in the meantime, grow that overall UAL a couple $1 million.
Have we started paying down the bond yet? The first couple of years, we're not paying.
Yeah, we had about a 10-month lag in that schedule. We've made a couple of years of payments
Okay.
now. Yeah, we've written, it's a $13 million,
Yes.
$13 million check we write.
Full burn.
Yeah.
Yep.
When do we write that check? I forget.
We just wrote it, actually. We do it quarterly, so.
I had a couple of
sir.
questions about the decision packages. So for example, decision package 41, where we're hiring a new homeless housing coordinator. And, that, like you were just saying, structurally balanced, but that's a position that will disappear after 1 year. And the other question I had sort of tied in with that.
Yeah.
I saw a presentation from the mayor showing how effective our housing program here in Redondo is, and that the number is shrinking, but it obviously won't go to zero. And I was just wondering how many of the decision packages are things like that where we'll have ongoing annual costs for positions and things like that.
Yeah, so this one is an ongoing, we've got this proposed as an ongoing appropriation. So it's one of the few that we've added as a structural cost. And that's an area where, sometimes we'll delay the paying on M&O expenses because they can cycle a little bit. And not that we know we won't have to pay it, but we have a little bit more flexibility there. When we put a body to a position, we want to make sure there's a forecast for sustainability. Last thing you want to do is hire somebody and then, have to lay them off a year later because you just can't afford to pay it. So what's different about this is we've had success in grant funding a lot of these activities. So we're proposing it as an ongoing cost to the general fund. But the reality is we will pursue grants to offset that cost. And we may be successful in doing so. So I felt good, even though we don't, it's not a time or a year where we generally want to add structural expenditures to the budget. This is an area where there's a pretty high probability of grant opportunity to maybe offset this burden. So we feel confident to make the recommendation. And it's been such a successful program. You might recall in the last few years, the attorney's office and our staff have been working on perhaps needing additional mental health clinicians and support. What we're finding is the most success we're having with that program is really through our housing navigator. And it's that day-to-day contact and that relationship that is really bringing about a reduction in the homeless population in our city. And we think adding to that with a higher level position, supervisory position, and maintaining a navigator will really double those efforts. And in a sense, it's kind of in lieu of some of the other services we've been exploring.
Okay.
Mike, a question on 41, because it brings up something we've discussed at the commission before. If I was king, I would want to know every dollar that we're spending for the homeless issue. And because it's a real problem, we're making real progress. But a city manager and a city council should focus on two things, I think. One, what is that total cost figure for everything? And then the second, what are we getting in outside funding to fund it? So the delta, the difference, is what we're paying out of our own pocket.
Out of our own pocket.
And it seems that really is a critical piece of information that you and council should have. Are you getting that data, or can you? I mean, there's some hard costs and there's soft costs. There are attorneys' time being spent for this that we should factor into that.
Right.
So that seems to me to be something that you all should know, that we should know.
Yeah, back of the envelope, I can give you kind of some high-level understanding of it and tell you, generally speaking, about 30% of the ongoing expenses associated with the program are covered by the general fund. 75% of them are covered through supplemental grant funds. It ebbs and flows depending on what specific initiative we're working on at any given time. And some of those recurring expenses have changed over time. We do different survey work now than we used to. We've had some trial and error programs that we looked at, kicked the tires on, and ultimately decided not necessarily going forward. You know, the things that have structural cost to us are the housing navigator position that's fully funded by the general fund. That's got a value, you know, $125K or $115K, somewhere in that ballpark. We dedicated an additional police officer position to the work to help supplement that outreach. Now, we get additional value out of that position that goes beyond homelessness. So it's not, in my mind, entirely appropriate to allocate 100% of that cost to the structural costs associated with homelessness, because if we didn't have these supplemental work, the police department would have to pick up that work otherwise, right? So you've got really a couple $100,000 a year of general fund money subsidizing our outreach efforts. You've got well over $1 million of total expenditure through the pallet shelter program, the contract, you know, mental health clinicians, the work that we do through homeless court. But the lion's share of that really is, at this point, still coming from supplemental grant sources, the county, the state, et cetera. So, you know, we're still getting a lot of value, a lot of bang for our buck through the general fund money we do spend. But my worry is down the road, those grants, you know, those grants shut down, and then all of a sudden we have to make hard decisions about what elements we continue.
If the state's running a $70 billion deficit, then it puts some of that funding potentially at risk.
Certainly future funding at risk. What happens is a lot of these grant funds come from the state, they sit in a pot, they're appropriated in a pot, and we draw on them for a couple of years. It's the replenishment of that pot in the out years that worries me. Same at the county level. So, you know, for now, and that's why we do annual budgeting. You know, not every community does that. Some folks do biannual budgeting. You know, we evaluate this each and every year. You know, we feel like we can continue the programs, and in this case, enhance the programs we're currently offering. You know, the equation might be a little different 2 years from now. You know, we might have to make some choices and maybe not do all the things that we're currently doing if those grant funds become unavailable.
There are a couple of decision packages in here where we're replacing funds that were previously provided by Beach City Health District.
Yeah, there's
Are
50,
are
over $50,000.
they backing out of funding?
Yeah, they're just, their cash flow is a little constrained right now. So they just, one of the cuts they made to their operating expenditures was the supplemental grant work they do for our fire department, our police department, and then Hermosa Beach and Manhattan Beach's safety agencies as well. So they gave us a heads up a couple months ago saying, hey, we're sorry. You know, we love the programs. We think very highly of them. We'd love to continue them. We just don't have the funds to do that next fiscal year. Hopefully they'll be able to turn those back on in future years.
You've talked in the past about salary increases, the fact that we were underpaying compared to other cities around. Which of those groups have we added funds to? Fire, police, and?
Virtually all of them at this point. The last group that we're negotiating with is fire. We're having those conversations now. We hope to have an agreement here in the next couple of weeks.
But in this new budget, it shows increases for everyone other than fire?
Yeah, fire shows, it shows growth for fire. Maybe depending on where we land in final negotiations, it may not fully provide funding for that. But we do have forecasted year-end savings from the 23-24 fiscal year that we haven't rolled into fund balance that will be available to us in the fall to cover the delta. So I'm not too concerned, but we've increased the personnel budget in the fire department, some anticipating those increases through the labor agreement, but depending on where it lands in finality, we may have to do some supplementing.
I had one question. There's a major facilities reconstruction fund that we have because one of the discussions we always have is about the fire stations and the police department and city hall and the money that we would ultimately need to have to do all the renovation work we need. And then also in your letter, I believe you talked about our capacity for debt financing, and basically because we're today sort of perfectly balanced, any new debt would have to be supported by, you know, new taxes.
New structural revenue.
Right, exactly. So are we, in our current budget and, you know, going forward, do we anticipate allocating some money to this fund to help cover those costs, or are we potentially thinking down the road, we'll have to just finance it when that day comes.
Yeah, more the latter, I think. I'd love to be able to say, hey, we've got this nice little ISF, $1 million set aside that can easily be repositioned to be used for debt service. We don't have that. The Major Facilities Reconstruction Fund, we started it small. We jazzed it up a little bit, but it's really very small. So I think it's I don't know, what is $150,000, $180,000 a year the general fund is setting aside into that fund for those types of activities. So, that number, ideally would be like $3-4 million a year. And it's not. So, yeah, you've correctly assessed our dilemma here. If we take on additional capital debt financing for, short-term capital need, right? Property acquisition, significant facility upgrades. Ideally, we would align those future debt service payments with some kind of a new structural revenue source.
Okay.
Whether it be increase in TOT tax or, some kind of new economic development activity that's creating sustained growth or whatever it is. I'd like us to align those two as opposed to just say, oh yeah, no problem. The general fund will absorb it in a couple of years. Don't worry about it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And that's why you're getting this talk about maybe a general obligation bond that potentially wouldn't be financed with general fund proceeds, but through an increased property tax assessment. Right.
Is that what's highlighted in the unfunded or underfunded CIP projects?
That's an old
the public
list.
facility, okay.
It's an old list. We've kind of kept that as a tool. It really should probably drop off and be refreshed. One of the budget response reports, and there's actually going to be a standalone discussion item that'll run in parallel as part of the June 11th City Council meeting, which is the night where we focus the budget discussion on the CIP. We're going to have a standalone discussion item that will talk about the propensity or the process for a general obligation bond and what that looks like. We've commissioned a construction cost estimator, Griffin, to help us I think I mentioned this to you at the last meeting, to identify what it would cost to substantively renovate our major 6 facilities, the 2 fire stations, the 2 police facilities, City Hall, and the Public Works Corporation yard over off of Gertruda. We've got estimates on that now. It's about kind of what I thought maybe back of the envelope, we'll get into the details on the 11th, but roughly $100 million or so, depending on how much contingency you want to put in for the renovation side of the equation, somewhere between, somewhere around 2.25 or more for full reconstruction.
Yep.
So you've got different options with different facilities. In some cases, the renovation option is closer to the reconstruction option. In other cases, it's kind of what you'd expect. It's maybe a third of the expense as opposed to 2/3. So it's case by case there, but Griffin's given us that info. That will be part of the needs discussion, and then we'll talk through process on a general bond. As you've heard, other agencies are exploring them for the fall. School district and even the Beach Cities Health District are contemplating floating bonds as part of the ballot.
In your letter, you talk about a couple of different ways of raising revenue. One of those is that increasing the TOT, and the other is increasing the sales tax. How do we compare with adjoining cities on both those two issues?
Funny enough, it used to be we're all the same on the sales and use tax, but you might recall Torrance a couple of years ago raised their sales and use tax by 50 cents, basically 0.5%. So they are now significantly higher than we are. They're basically double or time and a half our figure. Hermosa Beach is actually exploring an increase, I think, this fall. And I believe, I haven't looked at their ballot measure. It's not come out yet, but I believe that they're looking at the full cap of an additional 0.75%. So they'll go from 1 on the local level to 1.75. Torrance is at 1.5. We're at 1. So all of a sudden, what was a worry at one point is, we're now not going to be competitive in the retail market. It's now, we're actually better than our neighbors in that respect. On the TOT side, I believe Manhattan Beach recently took their TOT up to 14%, so we're at 12. Santa Monica, I want to say, is at 17.5 or something like that. Anaheim's obviously a really high number. They're up there at the top. So I throw out 2% in my message because in my mind's eye, that's kind of That's probably the number we would think is reasonable, given where we are in the competitive market. Don't know if we could really justify much more than that. Beauty of TOT is it's not necessarily borne, that impact's not borne by our residents, it's borne by visitors, so.
Yeah, that should be a favorite tax. It's a tax. We get revenue and it's not taxing us. It's
Exactly,
taxing
it's paid
someone
for by
else.
others. So, like we always say, love spending other people's money. That's the idea. So, but that one, that one's got to go. Has a process, and you've got to go through an assessment and an analysis, and then you got to get it on the ballot. So that one takes time. Those tax.
That would have to go on the ballot?
Yeah, I believe so. Under current law, it would. Old days, it didn't have to, but now I believe it does. The Prop 218 case law has really tightened up those requirements. So both the sales and use tax would have to go to the ballot, as would the TOT tax.
I've never quite understood the reserve we're funding with TOT that kept TOT contributions to the city down. Explain that in 25 words or less. What are we funding?
Well, I'll use the phrase, and this may not resonate, site-specific tax pledge. If you go back to the conception of the Marine Avenue Hotel development, it was a terrible time. Nobody was financing hotel projects at the time. In fact, even the state, which started to create kind of a state bond opportunity, shut that down. So nobody was lending. The financial community was not lending to hotel projects. In order to execute a project there, what the bank said to the developer was, look, if you can get local government to commit and backstop your financing, we'll lend. So what was negotiated was this site-specific tax pledge, whereby transient occupancy taxes generated by those properties once in operation would be sequestered to what's called an authority-funded reserve account that would be controlled and accessed by the banks under certain conditions. Basically, if the pro forma, if operating expenditures exceeded operating revenues at a certain level, and there were certain financial or capital commitments that were required based on the brand, like if Hilton, the Hilton Garden Inn is saying, hey, we're evaluating your property, it's fallen into disrepair, you need to make the following upgrades, and you add that capital pressure to that expenditure line, and there's not operating revenues to cover that cost. Under certain circumstances, these waterfall provisions, they call it in the agreement, which candidly are pretty generic, they could be better spelled out. The bank can draw against that fund to cover their payments. And of course,
we're aiding in their financing for a period of time.
For a period of time. So, originally the deal structure was negotiated where that authority funded reserve was at $8.5 million. So, and that's a big number, and at the time only 2 hotels had been constructed. So at most, that thing was going to get a $2 million deposit every year. It was going to take 4 to 5 years to fill that thing to where we were even going to see TOT generated from the site. Thankfully, when they came in to pursue entitlements for the construction of the 3rd hotel, and they asked to extend the AFR to the 3rd property, at the time, myself and a couple others, we said, well, time out. 8.5 this is too big a number in today's environment. The fiscal community doesn't need that kind of set aside anymore. Things are better. Let's get that lowered. So we renegotiated the authority funded reserve cap from $8.5 million to $3 million. And then once the 3rd hotel came online, bang, all of a sudden cash flow was coming to the city, and TOT was coming in at basically $1 million per site rate. We were getting $3 million a year from the three hotels. No more money being siphoned into the AFR. Well, of course, what's the perfect storm for those waterfall provisions to be triggered? We had the pandemic. So their operating pro forma takes a dive. Bank says, okay, start hitting the fund. And the way it works is they draw from the fund, and then we get back into repopulating mode. The fund has to be replenished before we see the TOT. So we're in that mode now. And then what exacerbated the problem is the hotels during that pandemic cycle got into some level of disrepair, right? And the flags came in and they said, well, we need upgrades. You don't upgrade these sites, we're pulling our brand from your property. So those obligations kicked in, that further drained. So we'd see it kind of fill up, and then they draw it, anyway, so we spent a lot of time with them. Wendy and Stephanie spent a lot of time auditing those expenses to ensure that they're accurate. We're still reviewing, in some cases, retroactively what occurred to ensure it was compliant with contract. But yeah, it's been a journey. And the good news is they seem to be stabilized and on an upward trajectory now. That's why we're forecasting that we'll start seeing TOT from the property next fiscal year.
And how long do those agreements last?
Basically in perpetuity. It's under a lease agreement that I want to say has another 5 decades on it. I mean,
Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of financing, the shopping center,
Gallery, yeah, so South Bay Social District.
yeah, where do they stand on their financing now? Are they getting closer to getting it done?
So they have, my understanding again, and I'm not fully aware of all of the current details, but last conversation I had with the proprietors, they have financing arrangement that is extended a line of credit through basically the end of the calendar year, a little short of that, I think. And they have been slowly trying to provide kind of lease prospects and lease, kind of tentative lease agreements. I think they might even be beyond tentative for groups that would come in and rent space, right? Rent property once they get reconstructed. They need the commitments ultimately to give the lender comfort that if they outlay this money for the renovation, they've got good, solid perspectives that they're going to get their principal and interest payments paid in the future. What they're focused on now, candidly, the lender has basically told them, look, if you can get the second phase of the residential component of the project entitled, we'll extend your construction line so you can begin execution of the project. So they're kind of waiting on what's the community's reaction to the entitlement of that second, that 300 extra 300 homes that they're proposing now at what would be the southwest corner of the property. So, in layman's terms, I've been told effectively if they're successful through that entitlement process, they're probably going to be able to renovate and they'll have the money to do it. Of course, things could change between now and November, I suppose. But that's kind of where they're at today. So the sooner we get certainty on that, I think the better their prospect.
Regarding fire department, I know that you had a huge meeting on the fire department issue. There was some indication from city council of what commissions should do ongoing on that issue, and I was unclear what budget and finance should be doing.
Yeah, so several of the commissions later this summer will have an opportunity to, we'll have an agendized item where you'll get a copy of the reports that were provided to council, and then you'll get an opportunity to provide suggestions to the council on components of the studies that speak to department operations, right? Citygate identifies some opportunities. They talk about deficiencies in facilities, in certain cases, money that we should spend. They talk about potential operational enhancements. So you'll have an item before you to kind of go through those materials and give, staff, really the fire chief and finance and whomever else is assisting in that discussion, kind of, input that would be brought back to council for their consideration, really on the future of the fire department's operation. What I will say is not part of that conversation, though, is whether or not the commissions think we should go to county or stay a local department. The council's made the decision to remain a local fire department. So your focus will be more on, hey, what are the elements of those reports? Because a big component of the Citygate study was what they call a master plan for the fire department, which speaks to things that you could do to enhance operations, things you could do to enhance facilities. That's really what you'll have a chance to look at all the reports, but you'll really be speaking to and deliberating and providing advice and input to the council on the items that pertain to future fire department.
And that's to come, you said later in the summer?
Yeah, probably, I'm guessing August, September, in that time frame, depending on when schedules line up.
Are there any other questions? Okay. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. And then in terms of any formal input you want to give to the council on the budget, obviously, you can do that through kind of a motion. You could do that through just conversations. We could take notes. We can pass it on through memo. We codify your input in a budget response report each year. It sort of shares the feedback. So if there's anything demonstrative you see in the proposed budget, you go, oh my God, Mike, what a clown. Why did he recommend that? I'd like the council to cut that out of there. Or if there's anything that you think's really important that's in here, those types of comments would be
Clarify the budget response reports. This is something that's prepared by city council?
staff. So they ask the question. So imagine, you say, hey, boy, I've been curious about what it would cost to, build a 100-foot monument out here in front of City Hall. We would go back and go, okay, well, if you did a 100-foot monument in the following it would cost $1 million. And we would provide that supplemental information to council as part of their agenda materials. The budget response reports will be online in a link. So that link will be updated periodically with new deposits. You'll see probably if you check in on it later tonight, I don't know how late, but later tonight, you'll probably see, 15, 20 budget response reports. And then if you click on it next Tuesday afternoon, you'll probably see, another 5 or 10 on top of that. And then if you click on it, next Friday, you'll see another, there'll be 40 of the 51. And then following Tuesday, hopefully there'll be 51 of 51, something like that. So if you go to the online link, it's there, and the budget response report link will be part of that same spot.
Okay.
There's a table of contents, you can get a sense of what's being asked.
You're going to have a monument of you? Is that?
I would not recommend that.
Why does Redondo have a bust of the city manager?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's a wonderful use of resources. Yeah, no, not into that.
Just an 8 by 10 photograph would be fine.
Tell you what, I'll give you a cardboard cutout for free. How about that? Anyway, so if there's anything in particular you'd like to provide feedback on, great. If not, appreciate always, as usual, your work and all the time you spend on this. So thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Bid you adieu for tonight, and we'll see you all around the next time. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do I have a motion
Yes.
to receive and file?
I move we receive and file the budget.
Before you do so, I just want to note there's no public comment on the discussion item.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion to receive and file. Do we have a second?
Second.
And Doug, could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Jesse?
Yeah.
Commissioner Marin?
Aye.
Chair Castle?
Aye.
Commissioner Woodham?
Aye.
Commissioner Sherbin? Aye.
Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda are the member items and referrals to staff. Are there any member items or referrals to staff for tonight? Have your-
Yeah, I would like to suggest that we discuss the article that I had planned to distribute about the city's unfunded liabilities, how some cities are facing a monumental crisis. San Francisco Chronicle had a wonderful article, and I wanted to distribute that, but if we put it on the agenda, as Stephanie has suggested, we can talk about it next time, but she will send all of us copies of the article, and then we can discuss it. I think it's a very appropriate topic, and something that some cities are really having a huge struggle with it, and I just hope we don't get to that point. So the more we know about what's going on in the state, the better off we will be. So.
All right, thank you. I look forward to reading that. Are there any other items or anything from staff tonight?
I just wanted a clarity on that. So the referral to staff is to open a discussion of unfunded liability practices throughout different municipalities. Is that correct? May I suggest that could we do that with commensurate cities, apples to apples versus apples to pears? I don't want to compare a, $2 billion city to, our demographics. So, in the same population and maybe demographics, I would suggest that if that's okay with the commission.
My only comment would be to double up on what I told Mike. I think this document is a good document, and I know you guys have spent some sleepless nights putting it together, but I think it's a good document. And obviously you'll tweak it going forward, but it's a great document.
We appreciate that, and we've asked, residents, anybody just to give us feedback that is constructive, I think this year was the deployment phase to see how obviously it worked. We have some things to make it our own and tell our story as well. Updating and how effective 428 glorious pages of graphs and spreadsheets, which, excite us. But we want to make sure that it's something that, is used, whether it be, you're having trouble sleeping at night, but hopefully not end up at a doorstop either, because it is, resources of the city. But, I want to thank Stephanie and our analyst, Aaron Smith. I mean, we put together a budget yet again under 5 weeks, and it's been tough. But like I said, we welcome any feedback to make it better, so we really appreciate the support on that.
Can we talk about technology in particular, because that's becoming a very important item on the agenda, and which we get the reports almost every week, some city or utility or hospital getting hacked. And with the advent of AI, I think we just would like to learn a little more about what's going on and what your plans are.
As I mentioned yesterday in District 2's campfire meeting, believe it or not, the budget here, some of the paragraphs were designed by using AI, so I'm happy to say the city used it. However, as my father always says, you can't ever, mess with the old, right? And we still had to add the human factor of reading it and making it our story, and that it needs some tweaking, but we're moving progressively towards that to use every possible tool, having a budget digitally available to residents and everything on the spot, is, a huge success overall, so that people can establish that trust we want them to have on the transparency we're doing. So we're definitely focused on that. And then, we have the beautiful thing of auditors coming to give us more industry practices and things we should look out for, in that sense. So we look forward to that as well to continue to improve. So, and that's what we need you all for, is to let us know some ideas, and we'll definitely venture them out, so.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from the commission right now? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're now adjourned.
What are you doing now?